Oh, there's even more junk on my desk. It's the grudge match. It's the fight to the death. Unify versus EnGenius. Fight. If you haven't seen my other videos about power over Ethernet and the future of stuff, and I don't know, you should check those out. I picked up this. This is a PoE switch. This is like a $700 switch. And I've also got PoE devices that I'm working on to just experiment with, and it's like, can the PoE standards really be that terrible? So this is Raspberry Pi that is powered over the Ethernet line. I've deployed a lot of Ubiquiti gear. I've also deployed a lot of Ruckus gear and gear from Cisco. These are typically used in commercial installations, things like university campus or business installation, or really anything. This is just robbery, and it always has been. Cisco, I mean, they know what they're doing, and they do develop some accelerated silicon, and they've done a lot of R&D, but they're more on the let's own intellectual property side of things than let's innovate, at least in wireless networks. That's not necessarily true. Some of their actual like backbone products and some of the really expensive stuff they do is actually really good. But if you've ever installed a multi-access point network back in the day, Cisco, it was expensive and it was a pain, and yeah, it was better than other stuff that you could buy, but it still left a lot to be desired. There wasn't anybody that was really trying to innovate to do something amazing. And so Ubiquiti had a lot of early success, and they were really good products. But, they were a victim of their own success. They branched out into failed products, like this Ubiquiti IP phone that runs Android. Great in concept, actually pretty decent for an initial execution, immediately abandoned because these things didn't have enough phone, RAM, or horsepower or anything to manage Android updates. It's like they didn't plan on ever updating Android. Really, guys? Come on, you could have hired me as a consultant. I would have been like, what are you doing? Then there was the Ubiquiti AC Pro, APAC. There's a first and second generation version of this. This is heat discoloration. These were not good. This was some of the best wireless AC access points, as long as you didn't use them continuously. Otherwise, they would overheat, and so campuses and places that have a real high-density installation, it wasn't good. And that was around the time that Ubiquiti stuff started to get really popular for home installations. Well, they're resting on their laurels a bit, and maybe they're coming back a little bit, I don't know, but I've just been a little bit disenfranchised with Ubiquiti. So I was looking around, and I actually picked EnGenius, and one of the reasons that I picked EnGenius was because of this switch. This is 2.5 gig on all 8 ports, plus it's a 240 watt PoE switch. Well, this family of switches, because this is only an 8 port, but it's also available in up to 20 ports. So 240 watts for the 8 ports here, and I've got 4 10 gig uplink ports on this power over Ethernet switch. I can power my big power hungry devices, like PTZ cameras. I've got a 2.5 gig uplink for my really bandwidth hungry wireless access points, even my 4x4 solutions. EnGenius has their own. We're gonna take a look at that in another video. But yeah, so I mean, you can see I've got a lot of stuff here. Ubiquiti security gateway. We're not gonna cover the security gateway stuff on that yet because I couldn't find anything from EnGenius that does that, and I kind of right now prefer to build my own because I don't think there's anybody that's doing it right as far as that goes. And then we've got the, like the Ubiquiti. This is the ACHD, which replaces, like, these are really old, but this replaces it and it solves a lot of the design flaws. But you call them for an RMA and they just send you another dead one. So again, a little disenfranchised. There's also like Ubiquiti's home stuff where they're branching out again, but it's gonna be like this Android phone, I'm afraid. I just really haven't been super enamored with some of the Ubiquiti stuff. Like this Ubiquiti PoE switch, 24 ports, 250 watts. It's not bad. It's honestly not a bad PoE switch, PoE plus. Now, Ubiquiti doesn't think that you're actually gonna use all 24 ports for PoE. It's just that you can use PoE and other regular non-PoE devices on this. It gives you 24 ports. You got some stacking capabilities, and it's pretty solidly built. It's made of metal. Definitely heavy enough to really injure somebody should it fall out of the rack. The thing to understand with these products is that it's a family of products. You have a switch and an access point and other stuff that work together with that, like to an extent the power over Ethernet stuff, because these standards are imperfect. Like Cisco's power over Ethernet standard is far out in left field. They've reeled that in a little bit. It's a little bit less of a headache to work with as an administrator, but it's really important to talk about these products in the context of a larger ecosystem of these products. And that's one of the reasons why Ubiquiti did their home stuff, so they can do the home mesh and control more of the equation. But now I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute, is this a Ubiquiti review or an EnGenius review? Well, you have to understand that I've got a lot of experience with EnGenius, and they had a software update that they rolled out a few weeks ago, and it was absolutely disastrous. And I was still smarting from that a little bit. I've sort of regained a little bit of clarity, and I'm not seething with rage, but that mishap is what led me to try something different. And with that, let's take a look at the switch configuration. So let's talk about device management and configuration. EnGenius offers on-premise configuration or cloud configuration. And really, with the switches, it's a little bit of a marketing term, because the switches do give you a web GUI, like you can plug it into your network and configure it with a web browser just the way you would expect locally. But for the access points, the easiest way to deal with it is you just scan the access point with a QR code on your phone, and then your phone is going to use its GPS system to figure out where that is. You can draw that, you can use it as a heat map or whatever, and then everything is configured, in the cloud. So all of these devices phone home to EnGenius, and believe it or not, it's not a virtual machine based solution. Like, this is the other really interesting thing I found out about their stuff. It's an API gateway. So it's really just a configuration API gateway. It's not dependent on, say, a virtual machine running somewhere else that has configuration software. And these devices are smart enough to manage things on their own. One of the disappointing things about the Unify system was that when roaming from access point to access point, the handoff in some firmware versions is very clean, and in other firmware versions has been less than clean. EnGenius actually came out with some of this stuff earlier in 2020, and so I've had a few access points here in the lab that I've been experimenting with, because it was like, I don't know, maybe there's something better. And in my experience so far, the handoff between access points operating in a quasi-mesh-like scenario has been better. And frustratingly, the Ubiquiti home stuff has been better than their enterprise-grade stuff in terms of, I'm going to have a client and I'm going to wander, a laptop or something, and I'm going to wander around the office on a Zoom call. Most of the time it hands off okay. Sometimes it doesn't hand off okay. Sometimes I've seen it fail so that the access point is sending traffic, is the correct access point that's closest to the wireless laptop is sending traffic to the laptop, and then when the laptop sends the traffic back to that same access point, it never goes anywhere. It does it intermittently, which makes it really difficult to troubleshoot. In a 3 access point setup with the EnGenius access points, it didn't really do that. So anyway, about 2 weeks ago, I picked up this switch, this PoE switch, to go with some of the other equipment that I already had. And I reached out to EnGenius to ask questions. And I talked about this video and some of the projects that I have going on. And I mentioned, it's like, hey, I'm looking to do a setup. And they said, we actually have some new firmware and some new stuff coming out that we think you'll like. So they sent one of the ECW 120 access points, as well as the ECW 230. So the 230 is a 4x4 solution, and the ECW 120 is a 2x2 solution. These are commercial grade. You don't need these at your house unless there's 50 people living at your house. But I'm an insane crazy person, and this is also the office where I am now, so I'm going to experiment with it at the office, and then probably take some of it home, and then replace some of what is you can see on the ceiling. It's currently Ubiquiti. That's getting replaced. 2 of my access points, the ECW 230, these also have a 2.5 gig uplink. That's backward compatible with 1 gig if you're not going to have a lot of clients. You want concentration more than just raw throughput and raw bandwidth. 1 gig's fine. But these have 2.5 gig uplink. And so I'll be using a couple of these with 2.5 gig uplinks. I've got one computer that's going to plug into this with a 2.5 gig. It's got a 2.5 gig NIC in it. And then I'm going to use those 10 gig ports on this to get off to the rest of the network, which is 10 gigabit, like the old Arista switch or anything like that. I can go from SFP plus to copper, not a problem. I can handle it. If 2.5 gig is too rich for your blood, they've also got this. This is the ECS 1112FP. So this is 1 gig. It's got 2 copper 1 gig uplink ports. Those are not PoE. And then it has 8 PoE plus ports as well. This one on the bottom is PoE++, and this one is PoE+. You can watch my introduction video and learn more about that. even though you might not have any PoE++ devices, if you were going to have a fully populated network, it would still be better to get the PoE++ switch. Two reasons. One, it's get those 10 gig uplinks. Even if all 8 ports are running at a full gigabit, you're not going to saturate that 10 gig uplink. Whereas this is much less expensive. It's 1 gig across the board. If you've got a bunch of devices running, you could saturate that 1 gig uplink. If you're just providing wireless for internet access, chances are your internet connection is not faster than a gig anyway. It doesn't really matter. For me, testing laptops, doing wireless stuff that I shouldn't be doing, that uses a lot of bandwidth, got a whole bunch of computers, the density's through the roof. I need more bandwidth. I need more connectivity. Even though the internet connection is not super fast, I still want that backbone connectivity to other devices on the network. So it's a little bit of an unusual requirement that I have. Now, whether you're just configuring 2 or 3 of these or just 100, you really just, you unpack it, you scan the QR code with the EnGenius application, it enrolls the device, it asks you a couple of questions, you set up your account with the application, all that stuff ahead of time, and that's pretty much it. And you get a really sophisticated interface showing you the number of devices that you have. You can drill down into, it'll do operating system fingerprinting, it'll show you the types of traffic that are being passed. So it's like, hey, we're getting a lot of streaming video, or hey, we're getting a lot of Dropbox. Now, why is Dropbox using all the bandwidth? What is somebody doing with Dropbox that's gonna chew up all that bandwidth? It couldn't be simpler. In the box, you get the access point, of course. It's small and out of the way enough that you can, mount it on the ceiling or something like that. It does come with a bracket so that you're good to go. It's got some instructions so that you can get to using it really quickly. And then you get some mounting hardware, some nice big anchors for drywall. And that's it. Notice there's not even a power adapter in here. Expected to use power over Ethernet. Now, if you don't want to splurge for a power over Ethernet switch, check out my other video. You can get a power over Ethernet injector. Good news, bad news. The wireless in your home is going to get a lot better. Good news. The bad news, or good news, depending on how you look at it, for how that's going to get better is you're going to have more wireless access points. Even the new wireless standards that use a different frequency, that frequency has a lot of trouble going through walls, but that lets you increase the density of access points where you can have one in this room and one in the next room. And unlike current, 802.11g, or, well, that's not really current, but like you get interference, and so you have to use different frequencies. But if the signal stops at the wall, you've got better options. And if you got an old house that's like lath and plaster or metal mesh, well, Wi-Fi wasn't working through that anyway. You just need to double up on the number of access points you've got. So this is a 2x2 solution. It gives you some pretty convenient indicators, a mesh indicator, 2.5 and 5 gigahertz. 2.5 gigahertz gives you a little bit better range through those lath and plaster and masonry walls versus 5 gigahertz. You got your power and your network indicator. One easy quality of life improvement that EnGenius could do for the next round of packaging is print a drill template on the back of the box. You get these real simple cardboard box with just printing on one side. Print a template showing where the screws are on the cardboard box. Then you can just rip the cardboard box and use that as a template for if you choose to do the installation to try to get it as flush as possible with the wall, where you're just using the screw mounts, like the hidden screw mount things where you can just slide it on directly on the ceiling or the wall or whatever. That would be easy, and it would cost nothing, and it would improve the installer's life because they could just use the box as a template. Some free consulting for you there, EnGenius. It's a lot of work. All right, so I set up 4 access points, 2 230s, 2 120s. Yeah, that's right, 2 4x4s and 2 2x2s. This is covering basically 2 houses and a workshop and a lot of square footage, probably about 6,500 square feet in all. So it's a lot of area, a couple of families. The fit and finish of the access points is pretty good. It comes with all the installation hardware that you'd need. Both of them are set up to install on a drop ceiling grid, or to mount directly to a ceiling, or to mount on like an accessory bracket or something like that. So if you have a standard outlet box but with a network cable in it, you can pop the faceplate off. You've got mounting options for mounting to that. You can mount directly to the ceiling or masonry with screws or whatever. You can mount it directly without anything because both access points have the screw hole mount, so you can mount it any which way you want. And the only thing that was a little off-putting is that was not a flush mount. Even when using the accessory bracket and some of the other stuff, you don't really get a truly flush mount. I think this is actually maybe a good thing, because one of the Achilles heels with this, and the reason this is discovered, is because it just doesn't breathe. There's no passive airflow circulation, and so it overheats and bad things happen. So at least with the EnGenius access points, there is a little bit of accessibility around it. They snap on. They don't really have any security features that I can tell, like the Cisco option. This giant metal bracket with this fairly elaborate latching and locking mechanism. It does have a plastic retention clip, but I think they figure you're going to mount all those access points somewhere that nobody can just reach up and walk off with it. And because they're cloud managed, it would basically be worthless for them to do so, because the MAC address and all this other kind of stuff is like a serial number. So it's like stealing an iPhone. I mean, there's no value in stealing an iPhone. It's basically its own tattletale. It doesn't really make any sense. So the resale value is kind of low. So all right, fast forward. Installation: 4 access points, 2 switches. Mostly it was a really good experience installing the software. Everything went really well. The cloud software, enrolling the devices, everything really worked. I even tried enrolling the same device multiple times, and it was like, whoa, you can't do that. That's under a different account. Now it remains to be seen how much social engineering would be necessary to convince EnGenius to move a device from one account to another, but suffice it to say, assuming that that's sufficiently good, then stealing equipment or buying recycled equipment, depending on if you want to look at the pros or the cons of it, may be problematic, because hey, the device is already enrolled somewhere else. You can't do anything with it. You can't manage it. And some of the devices, like the network switch, you can actually still manage locally. You can log into it locally. You can reset the password from the cloud. It also has the standard serial console and the reset buttons that you'd expect on a switch. So you do have a limited ability to manage the switch as an island in your network configuration locally. But I'm amazingly good at finding edge cases. So there are some really rough edges around this. So when I first started to set this up, I was like, okay, I got 4 access points, I got overlapping coverage, I've got 2 switches. The switches are what power the access points. Let's see if they took into account the edge cases. So the first edge case is I've just got a whole bunch of new devices. I've unpacked them all at once. I've plugged everything together. Everything needs a firmware upgrade. The cloud's going to manage that automatically. And this is one of the really great things about any kind of modern management software. And you get this from most all vendors in different ways, and they're deficient in different ways. One of the first ways that I found that the EnGenius thing is, I think, deficient is that it immediately tries updating the firmware on all devices simultaneously. Can you see what the problem is going to be there? You're updating the firmware on the switch has got to reboot. The switch powers the access points that are downstream. So if they're in the middle of a firmware upgrade, they're going to be rebooted in the middle of a firmware upgrade if the switch happens to beat it. That's a race condition, and I don't think they take into account that kind of a race condition. Second, there is actually a firmware scheduling thing where you can configure your access points and your switches differently. They each have their own tab, and you can say, hey, only upgrade the firmware from 2 to 3 a.m. The problem is that this was not respected. So if you look at the event logs, you can just see that one of my switches updated its firmware successfully, and the other one has just been stuck over and over and over. It's tried to update its firmware about 100 times, from the version ending in 29 to the version ending in 36. A second really questionable thing in this cloud portal thing is the drop-down menu, where it was by default firmware release was on beta, and I had to roll back to previous stable to move the firmware version from 36 to 35. I guess there's no available beta, or 36 is considered stable, when in fact, evidently it's not. And even the 35 version would not apply cleanly to my switch. So I used the cloud interface thing, and I just clicked a couple buttons and was like, hey, this is broken. And so this is the other really kind of awesome thing about this setup, is that you can just say, hey, this is broken, and they have access to your cloud profile and the logs and stuff. And even a tier 1 technician is going to look at that log and be like, oh man, yeah, that's broken. And they'll probably fix it, and then I don't have to worry about it as an administrator, which is actually kind of an awesome thing, considering there's no license fees or subscription or anything to deal with this. But like I say, I consider my switches to be, my 10-year infrastructure, and my access points to basically be disposable. And so far I've had a better experience with the access points being cloud managed and configured and all this kind of stuff than with the switches, which are cloud managed. I mean, you can run it locally. You do have that serial console port on all the switches, and you also, there's a web GUI and some other stuff like that. But hey, what are you gonna do? Also, really clean and intuitive in the UI is setting up the topology and setting up mesh. There's a function in here called auto pairing, which basically has all of your access points try to talk to one another to figure out sort of where they are. You can, of course, draw a floor plan and physically place your access points on the floor plan, and the software will kind of sort of give you a heat map to say, okay, this has coverage, this has better coverage. But, you know, for this building, it's made out of lath and plaster and brick and chicken wire, and the estimations of heat map are completely wrong. You basically, if you want, you know, more than a 10 meg connection, you're going to need an access point in that room, basically. I mean, the ceilings are 10 ceilings. It's a Faraday cage in here, basically. So you're going to need an access point in pretty much every room. Any home that has older construction, you might as well just dot your house with access points, and that's, you know, what I'm trying to do. I'm dotting the office with access points with my house and the office, same construction. So yeah, I think that they're going to have to work on that. They're going to have to work on making the interface obey the firmware restriction update. And there was also not an option to just be like, just stop trying to update the firmware until support can look at this. Just stop trying. There's no option to do that. Now, to be fair, literally all of the solutions that I've been complaining about have these same kind of problems. In the beginning, Ubiquiti was very solid and robust. But lately, the whole reason that I was searching for another vendor is because of exactly those kinds of weird edge cases and flakiness. And I've only experienced it in 2 out of the 4 devices that I've deployed so far. 1 access point, well, 6 devices actually, because 1 access point out of 4 and 1 switch out of 2. That's it trying to update the firmware again. It's just like, oh, I just rebooted everything. And then so like all the cameras are like, I lost power. I don't know why I lost power. So, you know, again, really annoying. And believe it or not, this is actually a better experience than you're going to get from some home residential cloud stuff, because it's the dumpster fire. If everything that you want to do is basically a completely out of the box scenario, you're probably not going to have a problem with any kind of home Wi-Fi setup, or at least the ones I've tried, which mostly Ubiquiti and a little bit an early version of the Google one. And I'm not super comfortable with Google doing stuff because I can see a lot of traffic leaving the network, which is a little disturbing. And I can't say that I've really seen that doing TCP dumps from Ubiquiti or EnGenius or anybody else. But I will say that this headache is precisely the reason why I'm looking for something else. Like, is the grass greener on the other side? The jury's still out. Probably going to do a follow-up video in a couple of months just to say how it went, see how it goes. Overall, the installation process, fit and finish, some of the other stuff, I like it a lot better so far. I like the cloud interface a lot better. The management interface, I should say, because it's a little bit cloud and a little bit not. And the control and the flexibility that I have the option to log to a syslog server, so I can spin up my own syslog server and actually send events there. The switch supports that right out of the box. I can configure it. It's a local server. Well, I mean, it could be an internet server too, but I wouldn't want to do that for security reasons. And so I really like the flexibility and control. It gives me an interface. I can see the traffic. I can do, you know, captive portal, splash page. I can do client by client restriction. I can even do radius logins. We can spool up a radius server out in the cloud. And so this is all, you know, pretty standard features, but if you've been under the loop or you've always sort of DIY'd your solution, some of these things are a little, maybe a little fancier for your experience than others. But EnGenius is going to have to work on those rough edges and take into account those bizarro edge cases. I had initially planned to do the grudge match with performance and installation comparison all in the same video, but I'm going to move the performance comparison to another video, and player 3 has entered the game, Cisco Meraki. Now, I will give you a preview though. So the performance of the EnGenius devices is top shelf. It is absolutely top tier. The 2x2, the 120, that's a Wi-Fi 5 implementation. The 4x4 is a Wi-Fi 6. I can manage almost a gigabit from a wireless device. That's the good news. The bad news is that's an iPhone 11. The fastest Wi-Fi 6 device I have is an iPhone 11, which is for, you know, development purposes. Why? Fortunately, the second fastest device I have is not an iPhone 11, but you're going to have to wait for the performance comparison video because it's not quite as cut and dried as it seems, but I promised, and the performance of these access points, the hardware, is on top. It beats Ubiquiti, it beats Cisco Meraki. Those are the devices that I had available to test. So, kind of mind-blowing. I knew that before I got started, which is why I went on this whole journey, and it has been several weeks in the making. But I thought I would share that. You're going to have to stay tuned. It may already be up on Patreon, It'll probably be out in a week or two-ish, give or take, for the full performance comparison using mobile clients and a couple of desktop solutions with Wi-Fi 6. Those are the two antenna solutions with Wi-Fi 6. In terms of like congested scenarios, I can't really test a congested scenario easily, but there will be several Surface devices with older AC Wi-Fi plus some newer Wi-Fi 6 devices. We'll see how that shakes out. So look for that performance comparison. Overall, I'm pretty happy. You know, sort of calmed down a bit now that the fallout from that Ubiquiti update that did not go well, or sort of behind me a little bit. They've really got to work on that. But I am impressed with what EnGenius offers. They're not at feature parity. In all seriousness, they're not at feature parity with Ubiquiti yet. But as many features as they have with the simplicity of their interface, and maybe even one-upping the whole cloud key versus a VM, there's some pros and cons there. We'll talk about that. But I'm really impressed with this product and the offering and sort of the ecosystem and what you can get in the way of PoE with 1 or 10 gig uplinks, depending on what your preference is. It's about time that we got some 2.5 gig devices, and 2.5 gig plus PoE. That's pretty awesome. So I'm Wendell. This is Level 1. I'm signing out, and I'll see you later.